Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Welcome to the Thought Square podcast. Today we have a special guest with us today, and that is Brother Abdullah Andalusi. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. How are you doing, brother?
Wa alaikum assalam.
It's good to have you here.
Pleasure to be here.
Alhamdulillah. Brother Abdullah Andalusi is an expert in modern topics such as secularism, atheism, and other advanced topics such as these, and also involved in political debates as well, especially regarding the Israel-Palestine conflict. We also have with us Brother Mugheerah Luqman. Assalamu alaikum.
Jazakumullah khair. Assalam.
Today our topic will be how atheism seeped into the Muslim lands. So how did the ethics of Enlightenment era, which was an exclusive property of the West, right? How it seeped into the Muslim lands and how we are affected by it. We can see that we have adopted a lot of their systems, their ethics, their morals, even into our system. And how this, what was the history behind it? How it came about? So this is the topic of today. So today, inshallah, we will cover this. We'll start with this. Brother Abdullah Andalusi, the floor is yours. Please begin.
Okay. Well, first of all, barakallahu feekum for having me on, and it's a pleasure to meet both of you and be on the same platform as you to discuss these interesting topics. So it's not only the food that's spicy here in Pakistan, also the topics is good. What I've kind of read and observed is that the Muslim world didn't see atheists pop out within it out of a vacuum. Nothing comes from nothing, right? So, but you see it really develop the rise of atheists. I mean, they're not really a significant even minority currently, but they're still there. There's a gradual influx. In Turkey, it's actually the rise of deists, right? So they haven't gone all the way to being full atheists, but just deists believing in an uncaring God, or a God that's not really bothered about the things he creates. So why is this the case? Where did this come from? What's going on? It basically, and I don't mean to put all the eels on the feet of the West, but colonialism is a major factor here, and a key idea that was shipped into the Muslim world and coerced and forced upon the Muslim world was the idea of secularism. So I would like to, in a sense, trace the genealogy of the idea of secularism a little bit to decipher, well, why are we blaming secularism? Why not just in this era of scientific discoveries? Is that not maybe the case? Maybe is it not science, the new technology that we have and we're developing, that's taught people to rely on human ingenuity? Is that not the cause for atheism, as the common popular narrative states in the media and so on and so forth, and what many atheists would like to claim it is? The reason why I say secularism is because the West didn't start to develop because they became atheists. The West is still technically, in most of its countries, majority atheists of some kind. And they, even if it's in some cases just spirituality, what have you. So England, for example, though
Spiritual but not religious.
Spiritual but not religious, yes. They are a higher power that doesn't make any demands or any particular demands, but you can connect to it if you like in your own way. So in England recently, the census came back and showed that Christianity is now a minority religion. It's just under 50%, but still Christianity is quite strong. America, Christianity is very strong. There's was it over, I think, 20 or 30,000 church denominations in America. So still going strong, and it's the world's powerfulest country and one of the key areas of development. Now, sure, China is more atheistic because of communism and Marxism. It didn't used to be, of course, and it's rising. But it wasn't, again, atheism that really was the key issue there. The key issue was that the Chinese and the Europeans, they learned development before they learned atheism. And in the West started to change and develop and progress, technologically speaking, in the 12th century, right? Interaction with the Muslims. They discovered Muslim books on science and physics and new technologies, new agricultural methodologies, the windmill. All these things were amazing developments. And the Christian West, up to that point, had adopted the idea that there's no point trying to improve society. All you can do is administer to society, protect the people's creeds, and give them the rights, with an R-I-T-E, not rights. baptisms and funerals and marriage and mass and confession, because they were Catholics. Minister David writes, until Jesus returns and the end times begins. Right, so it was just to maintain things and wait for Jesus to come in.
And to sort things out, maybe.
To sort things out.
Allow the Jesus to actually sort things out, because we are unable to do that.
Yeah, so to do nothing and wait for the Mahdi and Jesus to come. Oh, sorry.
This is Muslim
Freudian slip there.
As well. Yeah.
Sounds familiar. So that's what stunted them. They didn't view they needed to improve society. It was a sinful world controlled by the devil. This is literally, it was their doctrine. Okay, so what changed? They encountered Muslim civilization was more advanced and had better adab and akhlaq, was much more civilized in themselves, and this shocked them to this, because like, why are these infidels better in behavior than us when we have the true revelation, and they would argue we have the wrong revelation. And they've made all these improvements, these developments. They have better sanitation. They have a better sewage system. They have all these improvements and things. What's going on? And this triggered in the West the idea of the possibility of progress and improvement, the improvement of society via technology and culture and the arts and so on and so forth, to help refine the characters of the people. The idea of, you could say, tarbiyah and tashkiyah.
Yeah.
It wasn't just, you need to go to mass more, you need to read the Bible more. Not that they let the people read the Bible, because it was in Latin and most people were not educated to read it, but they would listen to the priests give their sermons. So no, I know I've started really way back, but I'm coming to it, all right? Because the atheists would later claim that atheism produced progress. Atheism is the reason why the West progressed. Nope. From the 12th century, so it's 1100s, all the way to there was about at least 7 to 800 years of technological development in the West before the first secular state was created. The first liberal state was created.
So if we back up, so the idea is that they were, you can say, in a way, inferior. They were feeling some sort of complex, right? An inferiority complex with the, you can say, Islamic world, so to speak. And they wanted to, you can say, in competition, beat them, right? Or there was a focus and heavy focus on progression and technological advancement due to this complex. Is that the summary of this idea? You can say that?
Yes.
Or at least one factor into this.
Well, I mean, they learned the idea that you can improve society without waiting for Jesus. I think if I was to distill it, that's what they learned. Tarbiyah and tashkiyah is possible if you improve the material conditions of the society, as well as improve education, improve literacy, and use cultural arts and refinements and things. You can begin to create improvements in the people's behavior.
I want to ask a question here about the progress that you mentioned. So my question is, when we talk about the progress, why did the West, or generally, if we talk about the Muslims as well, we get so much inspired by the idea of progress? Does it have some ideological basis, or is it just the love for this world that attracts us, the love for the material? My question is, why do you think that the idea of progress was so easily shipped in, or so easily was bought by even the Christians? Of course, they were not atheists. These were Christian people who used to believe in God, and they had a prophet and the book and everything, the guidance to a certain extent. So is it mainly some ideological onslaught that was done somehow, and the idea of progress was initiated like something that every progress is, the basic idea of progress is, again, that every time that is going to come is going to be better than the before, and the progress means that you're currently living in a kind of a backward state, and then you'll be improving. A linear progression of history, that's the idea. So is it it is the philosophical or the ideological? Does it have ideological basis primarily, or is it just the attraction of the material improvement or the development that people get attracted to? Or they work together somehow?
It's two things. One is that the Enlightenment is different from the Renaissance. And people often confuse the two. The European Renaissance was them beginning to materially progress,
right,
and get the idea, which was they say the first Renaissance was in the 12th century. It's disputed amongst historians, but 12th century, you see them start to change. quite drastically due to contact with Muslims, mostly wars, but they take our books. They're actually very clever. They are Aqidah books. We don't want that. We just want your learning on maths, physics, chemistry, and so on and so forth. And technology, we'll take that. I wish Muslims had the same filter today, right? Yeah. Anyway, so but what happened later on is the Enlightenment happened, and the Enlightenment was a unintended byproduct of the process that the Renaissance started. It wasn't intended, and it goes a little bit something like this. So I just want to kind of, I suppose, dig a little deeper into the idea that when Christians talked about progress back then, and you see Francis Bacon start discussing it in his books, of the material progress of human beings, they don't think that we need to forget about Jesus, will make the utopia. No, they thought that Jesus will make perfection when he comes back. But why be I mean, we're always going to be in an imperfect situation, but we can be in a less imperfect situation, right? So why not just aim for as much, as close to utopia as possible, and then when Jesus comes, there won't be that much work for him to do. But the point being is, you can make improvements, right? So that was the key app, that they developed and they took, because it goes through Western thinking and ideas. But and I want to add something else, and this is mostly to attack the kind of the atheist 19th century propaganda that comes later on, where they say there's a clash between religion and science and so on and so forth, which is a false dichotomy, because I often say, look at the first universities in the West. Look at the first universities in the West. And again, all this is relevant to how it comes to the Muslim world, because colonialism is going to bring this. So the first universities are like former cathedrals, church buildings, churches, abbeys, monasteries, or what have you, with Gothic architecture. In fact. Yes, because the first patron of studying and learning was the Catholic Church. The remnant of the Roman Empire, you could say, in terms of Latin literacy and keeping the Roman law. And they just added new subjects onto their curriculum. Apart from teaching theology and law, we can now teach the physical sciences, and the latest chemistry, and a translation movement of Arabic text, and a translation movement of Arabic text with Greek philosophy
the same thing.
into Latin. So you see Thomas Aquinas and many others are avid readers of translated books, and they start discussing proofs of God that they took from both. Now they did take Muslim arguments proving God's existence, right? And adapted it or added some things, what have you, maybe produce a few new ones of their own in different ways, but like the ontological argument and so on and so forth. But the issue is that it was the church driving the investment into study and research. The church was meant to be those that administered to the flock, to the Jama'at, to the people, and to look after their well-being. And so helping to improve them was a church interest and goal. Then now people say, oh, but what happened to Galileo? Wasn't he executed, burned by the church for arguing that the earth, orbits the sun rather than the other way around? And that's completely false. And you guys obviously probably read that and saw it for yourself. But it's fed to everyone. Everyone thinks it until you say, that's actually not what happened. He actually was commissioned by the Pope of his time to write a book presenting the heliocentric model and the geocentric model, and just its merits and demerits, and just like, here we go, as a book. But he couldn't help writing that there was a character called Simplicio, who was the advocate for the geocentric model, and it made it look like he was mocking people who believe that, and some people say he was mocking the Pope with that. Whereas when Simplicio can mean simpleton, it also could be a simple Latin name. So because he was accused of this, that's where he fell into the hot water. And what was his grave punishment? It was house arrest.
Yeah.
Right.
That was the most...
He was still able to write and meet people in the South, and we read that. And there is actually an excellent book by Ronald and Numbers, right, on this Galileo and other myths about science and religion. Which covers all these myths, basically, that there was an internal historical conflict between science and religion.
And so as I said, the church was leading the charge in that. But then something happened that no one anticipated, the Enlightenment. And this is where atheism becomes a main contender in Europe. Now, usually you might get a few random atheists pop up. Ultra skeptics, they pop up, they just, it's their emotional disposition. They don't trust their society. They doubt everything, and they go a bit overboard, and they doubt everything at all. Everything, including the Bible and so on, as opposed to just Protestants who are skeptical of church traditions or the church doctrines, right? So they would go a step further. Now, they usually occur, but not in numbers, not in a community, not as a movement, not as a serious lifestyle worldview choice, or whatever you want to call it, until the Enlightenment happened. And so what happened in Enlightenment? Well, the idea was this: that Christians or Christianity is not suited or was not intended to be a political religion. It was never intended for the Roman Catholic Church, you could say, so the Roman Empire, rather, to become Christian and still be the rulers. Now what do you do? Because you've abrogated the Old Testament, which had the laws for politics and ruling and statecraft. So what do you do? And it was a bit of ad hoc. We take a bit of Roman law, we take a bit of the old Germanic law, because many Germans became Christian, and then they took over the West, became the French, and they became English. But what happened was there was disputes between Christians on points of, you could say, aqidah, right? Interpretations of the Bible. During the Mass, does the bread and the wine literally become the body and the blood of Christ, or is it metaphorical, right? Those typical debates. And depending on which position you were, you might deem the other side to be heretics and what have you. But because the Christian doctrine was that the state uses the tools of power to benefit the people, including chastising deviant doctrines and torturing Christians back into the fold. So depending on which state's official doctrine they adopted, which interpretation of Christianity they adopted in these things, they would torture various factions of Christians, and it became a fight. It became the 30 Years' War. It was almost like a prelude to the World War I in terms of its destruction in Europe. It was horrific. They did destruction throughout Europe, and it led people to argue, well, we need to stop having these using state power to get involved in Aqidah debates, in creedal debates. Otherwise, people just kill each other over it, right? Because they're saying, well, I have to torture you for your own benefit, to bring you back to the fold. But so then it depends the leader what his interpretation is. It could be anything. So they developed the Treaty of Westphalia. I'm not going to get too much into that. Which Treaty of Westphalia is actually not a treaty of secularism, by the way. It was simply just Quis regio ius religio. Whoever's the ruler, their religion. So it was basically if the ruler of a principality in Germany is going to be Catholic, then that's the official state religion of that principality. But he will tolerate the Lutherans or the minority, and if one prince is Lutheran, he will tolerate the Catholics. But the official state religion will be Lutheran or Catholicism or what have you. That was the agreement. And actually, Catholic Church hated that. They wanted the fight to continue. No. It must be the Catholic Church. Don't tolerate these minorities. It should be us. Okay. How'd that lead to Enlightenment? How'd that lead to secularism? How'd that lead to atheism? Well, it actually came about not due to the fight between Catholics and Protestants, as people think. It came because of a fight between Protestants and Protestants. Calvinists, Lutherans, Anglicans, Anabaptists would massacre each other if their interpretation became the state ideology. So, I mean, they talk about the American pilgrims leaving British shores and going to a free country, a free land in North America. These were Anabaptists usually, and they were leaving persecution by the Church of England. It was a bit of a nastier church back then. Now it's all airy fairy and lovey dovey, as they say, right? It wasn't like that. So the arrangement that people needed to make, and what they made was, they said, look, all this is happening because the state is been given an official religion that it has to sanction and then enforce. These interpretations of creed has to enforce. We need to resolve that because we're going to be massacring each other forever. So I tell you what, and then Hugo Grotius stepped on an answer. It was when he was trying to resolve the issue of international law. How do states relate to each other who have different religions, different beliefs? And he said that we need to find a law of nature we can get from nature that we can use to manage relations between different states who don't have the same religions. A law that would be universal and would be true even if given God didn't exist or cared for our affairs. Right? So it would still, these laws would still be true, and morality that would still be true even if God doesn't exist or Deism, he doesn't care for us.
If you don't mind my asking, what's the timeline? Is it before John Locke or after John Locke? Because I believe he gave a similar set of arguments regarding the law of nature and the intervention of politics into religion and vice versa, and the idea of tolerance within.
This is within John Locke's lifetime, but the ideas were posited before John Locke. Okay. Then you had the idea of Isaac Newton discovering natural law. The idea of natural law, even Thomas Aquinas talks about there's a natural law behind the universe and God has a natural law behind things, as well as a special law in revelation for human. This stuff that even Muslims, many Muslim thinkers before Aquinas were saying, God has a law for the universe and he gives a law for different things, and we have a sharia for us. Simple stuff, but it got taken. If science can uncover the natural law of the physical things that we observe, and we need to find a law that we can all agree on, that can resolve our disputes, that does not rely on interpretation of scripture, maybe we can find the answers in natural law, right? In the law of the universe. The big problem of this is that the laws of atoms and subatomic particles and motion has no bearing in human laws, right? I mean, sure, we are subsets of that in laws of physics and so on, but the halal and haram in physics is just what's possible and impossible, right? Nothing else. So this is where the idea of making a system that was based on the material laws of the universe, as if you could somehow extrapolate it onto human beings, come from, and to do away with revelation. Not because we hate revelation, they'll say, not because these are devout Christians. John Locke is a devout Christian. It's because simply they viewed it as a means to solve a practical problem. Okay. Yes. The first guy who really does this is Thomas Hobbes, not John Locke. But Thomas Hobbes argued that for a state to be stable, it must be based on the idea that the ruler has inherent authority because he has physical power through some type of inherent consent of the people, even if it was in the past or in many generations ago, whatever. It shouldn't be based on religious legitimacy. That was his new
social
invention.
Type.
Something like this. He even said, even if the leader can if he wants to enforce interpretations of the Bible, if he wants to, but as long as his inherent authority is not based on an interpretation of the Bible, that way you have a state that's more stable. Because if you disagree with the leader's interpretation of the Bible, then you say he's an illegitimate leader, and I'm not going to follow him because he disagrees with my interpretation of the Bible. And that's unstable, because each individual Christian can be a church unto themselves. They can be their own interpretation. They can have some unique difference of opinion in something. You could, take 100 individuals, you can have 100 different churches, right? That was it. And so some people argue that was one way individualism came about, was the idea that every individual might have their own interpretation. So then make a state that treats individuals, not enforces one collective doctrine that people might disagree with. That's one argument. There's another argument that I would say Thomas Hobbes, he uses a scientific method, quote unquote, on humans. Although he doesn't. No experiments, no tests, nothing. No reading anthropological data or documentation. He just says, let's treat humans as if they individually popped out the ground like mushrooms. Yeah? You know the scientific method. you take one unit of something, you render it in isolation, you do experiments on it to see its nature, and then you just simply generalize. Yeah.
Induction.
That's what he did. His own method, as he stated, like, humans are basically, let's treat them as these individual objects of study and then extrapolate. Even though he didn't really do any real experiments or any scientific method. But now I'll get to secularism. So the idea was quite simply this: a state that is not, its authority is not based on religion, and it does not enforce a particular interpretation of Christianity.
Okay, Abdullah, I just want to summarize this discussion, and you can have a glass of water as well, because Alhamdulillah, we are giving you most of the time to speak, Alhamdulillah. So what I've understood from your point of view is that the main problem behind secularism, or this material progress, or the scientism, in fact, or you can say the Enlightenment, or all of these things that we discuss about, was not about a conflict between science and religion. Primarily, it was primarily the conflict that was based different interpretations of Christianity, and taking that and enforcing those to the rest of the population. If a king who follows a certain type of interpretation, he somehow gets on the top. He somehow enforces all the others to actually follow that. And as a reaction, there was a dispute, and then there were conflicts. And in order to get out of that conflict and disputes, they had to come up with an ideology, or something you can say is the idea that accommodates almost everything, or that is in very technical terms you can say that is something positive in its nature instead of normative. Because when it's positive, like you mentioned about physics, or something that is amoral, or something that is acceptable for everyone, for example, and that is of course purely material based on the material level. In that sense, perhaps that was considered to be a solution, and that somehow justified the idea of secularism. Because if you enforce one interpretation over the other people, then somehow you're actually arguing that your interpretation is the only right interpretation of the text, and the rest of the interpretations are wrong, in fact. So how can you do that? Because there are individuals, there are different schools of thought that are... And
you're torturing them and killing them if they don't...
and that's the reaction as well. And the same idea is actually, discussed even in Pakistan and the Islamic countries. For example, when we talk about the implementation of Sharia, the same argument comes as a response that which form of Sharia, which interpretation of Sharia, the Sunni form, or for example the Shia, and then we have the different. So the only solution to get out of this whole thing is to make it subjective, and you follow your own interpretation, you follow that person, and let's enforce and apply secularism so that it accommodates everyone, and we agree on certain natural principles that you say, and then we rule people, and we all agree. I think, is that the same thing that you're trying to say, or is there something different? Different.
That's the argument in the Muslim world. I mean, generally yes, but the argument in the Muslim world that you can't implement Islam today because we have different interpretations. This wasn't what was said 100 years ago during colonialism. 100 years ago during colonialism, it was said that Islam is a backward. It was a religion of its time in the past. We've evolved past this. We've developed. We've learned past this. We can now do something different, make changes, and so on. And this is the key issue that would lead to atheism in the West, because once they said, okay, we can now make a law for a state based on natural laws, quote unquote, which is just speculations and things they developed. Eventually, people argued, or some people said, well, the idea that we can actually not depend on revelation, and in fact, we can develop laws which are more consistent, or at least less subject to interpretation. That's actually not true, because the Western political philosophers fight and have had wars between each other. The Cold War was a massive war between rival materialist ideologies in the West, but we won't go there just at the minute. So it was simply the idea that revelation is an imperfect guidance for political activity. And what do we mean by politics? The public and social affairs of mankind.
Mm-hmm.
If that's the case, gradually then, as secularism was established, and it was established with many Christians who were the ones who were establishing it with good intentions, they thought.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't see Christianity would be destroyed. But people realized, well, if our human developed ideas based on our studies of the natural world or what have you is better than revelation, then revelation can't come from God.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely.
And if Christianity for us is the best revelation, is what they'll say, of course, then there is no other revelation. Then there is no guidance from God. Either that means God exists and doesn't care, deism, or he doesn't exist at all,
atheism.
And then the idea was, we developed these natural, i.e. materialistic based laws due to our study and investigation, whereas before we didn't. This must fit into the idea of progress. We developed it because we were seeking progress. Therefore, it was inevitable we would seek it, and therefore it's actually it's called the
divine destiny.
It was initially called the Whig view of history, because the Whigs were like proto-liberals, that humans were all going to be destined to throw off the garments of their childish superstition. You know, like when a child learns to ride a bike, they have training wheels. Just taking off the training wheels now, we can ride free. This is where atheism and deism side by side, as because we know, like for example, the Freemasons, for example, who actually worship the idea of a natural law for mankind, were deists. They believe in the Creator, but they believe that He revealed His will through the natural laws, not through. I mean, they'd say revelation was maybe mankind's attempt to ascertain the natural laws, but we can now see it directly now with our own scientific method. So the idea that the scientific method is sufficient to derive laws for mankind, even though it was never used to derive laws for mankind ever, right? This is where in the West you see the rise of deism and atheism. Okay, so that's the West. We have the point now where in England, I think a majority of people identify as non-religious at all whatsoever, because Christianity is deemed to be not relevant. When you see today in England, sometimes Christians talk about we need to maybe open up the churches to have like daycare for nurseries, just to be of use. We need to make the churches and Christianity relevant for today. They always talk about we need to make it relevant for today. Why? Because it's irrelevant. Secularism has made it irrelevant. So, and liberalism is like, if secularism like is the undercoat, liberalism is the second coat of paint that goes on top of it. So, okay, so we've done away with religion. What replaces it? The idea that of the supreme sovereignty of the human individual, which is i.e. called liberalism. Okay, that's the West.
I have a point here, or I wanted to ask. Okay, so we've seen one thing. When these ideas came about, both conservatism and all these, either John Locke, Thomas Hobbes, Edmund Burke, all of them, they have a particular idea of human nature. So they have to give a new idea of what human nature is, and they disagree with each other. And they also have to base their polity on some sort of moral law. So there is also an activity of defining morality without the use of religion. And
going on there. Yeah.
So this is something that we also see in this progress as well. So isn't this part wasn't pointed out by anybody, or wasn't it contested to some capacity by Christians that we are again giving a moral law without the use of God?
Well, interesting enough, John Locke was refuting a guy called Robert Filmer, and Robert Filmer called it. He said, these many philosophers today try to find some assumed natural state of humans, natural law for human beings. And in doing so, this will lead to the destruction of Christianity and the bringing in of atheism. He called it. And John Locke was like, that's not going to happen. But Robert Filmer called it. He said, you're replacing Christianity, and you're going to make it not only irrelevant, but you're going to make God irrelevant, and an irrelevant God is no God at all. And then the idea was, well, but religion didn't step aside. The church didn't step aside. No one didn't step aside to say, okay, let's let progress produce this material law. And there's always clashes with new laws being brought in that contradicted with the Christian cultural traditions. So the idea was developed, and I think atheists started to challenge this, like William Draper, that religion is actually now an obstacle to continued progress because it's now, oh, don't change this law. What are you doing? Don't change that law, because it was intended that the state would have a Christian ethos. It just wouldn't adopt any particular interpretation of creed. But then people said, but isn't the state adopting Christianity itself an adoption of a creed? You know, so they zoomed out and go, wait a second, but Christianity itself is a creed, and there are other creeds. And that realization led people to say that then the state itself shouldn't be a neutral Christian state. It should not be even Christian. It should just be neutral, full stop. And then this is where the battles began, and the idea that religion, and the atheists argued religion is now an obstacle to us, to further progress. And then rewriting history, as William Draper did and others, the thesis of the clash of religion and science. Religion has always been a obstacle to progress, to even the material progress. Before we made the moral legal progress, it was even an obstacle to the material progress, even though that's not the case.
Retrospective reading of history in a different the perspective of a conflict thesis. This is called the conflict thesis, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry.
Please.
Now we're going to get to the point where they step on Muslim shores.
Okay, Abdullah Bhai, the question that I have is that we talked about the torture and we talked about the aggressive reaction and response of the state to the interpretations that were actually not acceptable by the supreme leader or the king at that time or someone. The same argument could be brought in case of Islamic history as well. We have many incidents of inquisitions, for example, Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal rahimahullah. And then on the other side as well, they might argue like Ja'ad ibn Dirham and these people, the Mu'tazilites and all those people. So they might argue that the same problem was pertinent and existed at the time of in the Muslim history as well. And don't we think that that comes to the next question. So secularism, just like West thought that the solution to all these problems is to get out of this thing and just, follow some natural laws or something like that. Isn't it applicable for the Muslims as well, especially when we believe that this is the creator, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? At the same time, we're not denying the God. And we believe that He's the creator. This is the work of God. And in order to free from the interpretations of the word of God, we are now actually, relying on the work of God. So this is the argument that, for example, a Muslim can come up with. So do you think that there's some parallel to the Western history and the Islamic history to a certain extent?
That's a really beautiful question. And I'll say Muslims need to, there is an answer to it. And it's simply, look, the Mu'tazilites, there was basically three caliphs. And I think there was one case where I think maybe some Sufi sects were persecuting in one particular case.
Mansur ibn Hallaj and these people. Right?
Yeah, but these are very sporadic. For the most of the history of the Muslim world,
that was tolerant.
The caliph didn't get involved in Aqidah disputes between Muslims. And the classical scholars never asked the caliph to get involved. Their response was that there was an understanding of Islam where it was ma'lum fi din bil darura. Everyone knows you can't believe in two gods. You can't believe in a new prophet. You can't believe, deny a chapter of the Quran or make a new book. Basic stuff. You can't add a new salah. You can't subtract a new salah, from the five, and things like this. So everyone agreed that if you stepped over that line, you have left the fold of Islam without excuse, without ignorance. You knowingly did it, scholar or layperson. But the classical scholars, subhanAllah, have beautiful lessons for us. Whether it's Imam Ghazali, whether it's Ibn Taymiyyah, at different sides of the creedal debates. Even though they would say that we think that this person's, the interpretation of the Quran, they say this verse is a literal meaning, this word is literal, this word is metaphorical, this word is blah, blah. Even though we might think, I think that's a kufr idea from my perspective. I think this is jism. Or I think you're rejecting the words by denying its literal meaning, whatever. But I'm going to give the excuse to the scholar, to even a scholar, an alim, who you think, well, he's not a layperson, he's an alim, because the answers might not be immediately obvious. Right? There is an answer, and there is a right or wrong, but it's not immediately obvious even to an alim. So we're going to make the excuse of ignorance, right? And it can only be, that person can only be changed by argument, debate, discussion, munadhara, and rad, refutations.
And mudhakara is one.
Yeah, this was why Muslims never saw the need for secularism, because we never had serious portions of our history with real inquisitions, with massacres, with burning of heretics, of massacres of heretics. We never had that.
Yeah, the
Among
30-year
Muslims.
war is one of the most bloodiest sectarian conflicts in history. And even the Muslim ones don't even compare to that, I've heard.
Yeah. So coming back to the question of the Muslim shores, so how does how did it come to the Muslim shores? Yeah, sorry.
So in essence, it was rather the colonialists, you know, and I'm going to give you two examples of this. So there was one was a guy called I forgot his name now. But just skip my head. I always cite him history. So it was it was a colonial officer for Egypt, okay, and he basically Lord Cromer. So he wrote a book called Modern Egypt, published in 1919, and you will be shocked by how well he understood the Muslim mind and the colonial project itself. And he talks about his viewpoints towards. Also, there's also I think Lord Macaulay and his note on education regarding with India, which is quite infamous. So about talking about what they're going to do in India to the Muslims and Hindus and others. So that really shows you what was going on here. So I'm not going to say it just for my speculation. I'm going to say read this. They are very shocking by this. So basically, their point is when they came to the Muslim world, they respected Islam as a tradition and culture of a quaint people they encountered, like they did in any place they went. But they thought that Christianity was actually superior because Christianity set the groundwork that led them to their material progress and their moral and legal progress. Right? They thought Christianity is the necessary underlay. But what do we do with these Muslims who actually don't have this underlay, right? And they were. Some people said, let's have missionaries go into the Muslim world, make them Christian, and then they can follow our model. Others said, I don't think we need to do that. Instead, we have an education system. They didn't have to abolish Islamic education. They just defunded it. If there's no funding, then only a local volunteer would give Quran classes, right? But while the main state institutions with paid with tax money will be teaching a European curriculum. This is what they said and argued. And Lord Cromer called these new Muslims that would be created by the education mill that they had set in the Muslim world as Europeanized Muslims. And he said this, through going through the European education system that's set by us, the Europeanized Muslim loses his Islamism. That was the word they used for Islam back then, like Judaism or Hinduism. That's what they called it back then, was Islamism. After Mohammedanism, they used that. So, and they become agnostics at best. Most of them become agnostics. He's doing takfir on them, right? Because they've told that Islam is the truth, the guidance, and then you have a materially superior civilization come. And remember, many people are convinced that material success means that you're somehow innately superior.
White man's burden, the idea of white man's burden or something like
yes,
that.
Yes, the idea to educate and raise up the childish races and make them adults, quote unquote. And John Stuart Mill said the same thing, actually. But in a sense, there's hadiths talking about people convert to Islam when they saw the power of Islam, when they saw a conquest. So humans, nas, we associate material power with it must be right, it must be correct and true. Even though you might say, well, the Nazi Germany, for one state took on a whole number of states, had to be defeated by a coalition of massive, powerful states. So is Nazism true then? Is fascism true? Communism led to rapid progress and development of the Russians over the Americans. Does that mean that communism is true versus capitalism? And so on and so forth. You can make any kind of argument. They're not correlated, material success and moral correctness.
But
anyway.
there is a natural element to it. For example, if people sees somebody with material success, they naturally feel inclined he must be successful in other fields as well, including moral or any other else.
It's a typical assumption. And that was what led many of these, the upper classes that would then become the ruling elite in the Muslim world, into basically leaving Islam in some. They say, well, these people come, they're not Muslim. They come. They actually don't say it's Christianity that is, they're not guided by Christianity, although they are Christians, but they have this system that they want us to share, and it doesn't rely on revelation. That must mean then that revelation is inadequate. And if it is inadequate, it's not from God, and or God doesn't exist. And that is where you see that atheism and deism correlates highly with the upper classes in the Muslim world, even if they're not public about it. But it correlates highly with a lot of, I suppose, for you guys, you might say anecdotal evidence where you've encountered them, but I've been to other countries and so on, so it correlates quite highly. They either have a disregard or disdain, or maybe at best, and this is what the Europeans would also argue, they say, they also argue that, well, look, your religion is just a product of what was when you were of an ignorant time that you came from, and it was good for its time. But the march of human progress means it's no longer needed. Now, if you want to make yourself feel better and say that God intended this, and God intended that the Quran should only be like believed in only as a set of spiritual rituals which are private, and its political system should be is now no longer needed. If that's what makes you feel better, and then believe that. So you can say Islam was a product of its time. The Sharia is for the past. Yes, the Quran is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but maybe Allah intended it would have an expiry date. The Sharia would have an expiry date of some form. Here's the one that we usually argue. Oh, the Quran believes in justice. Okay, well, justice is secularism and liberalism. And so the God wants you to do that, right? So if that makes you feel better, great. But most of them will realize, wait a second though, but the Quran is meant to be a timeless guidance. The last word from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to mankind of guidance. It doesn't, can't see an expiry date on it anywhere. So if this is meant to be a better system, secularism, liberalism, then the Quran must not be true, right? And you guys know from your anecdotal encounters with liberals, and many of them are middle class or on the upper classes, that they have disdain for Islam even, but you can't say it publicly, of course. They never say it publicly. Yeah. And it's not me saying, it's not obviously you guys seeing this. Lord Cromer said this from his own interaction with Muslims coming out of the European education mill of Egypt. Tell the audience to Google it, because the copy is free online, right? You can find, I think, archive.org or something, I think it is. Modern Egypt, Lord Cromer, Cromer.
Yeah, found the copy online.
You found the copy on it, that's it. Read it, you will be shocked. He's very astute, the way he understands Muslims, the project he's going to create, and so on and so forth. Anyway, I mean, I could go wax lyrical into it, but this is
similar elements happen.
Atheism in Muslim world.
So similar elements happen both in here in Indo-Pak, in Egypt, in Turkey, and they were inspired by these you can say either colonialist mindset or education, and then our own indigenous, you can say some intellectual or elites adopted these elements and implemented in their respective countries, right? And we can see that how gradually it came about. So we can see that, and although obviously it's not explicit atheism in of itself, but in a way it is still sufficient to you can say that it puts one out of the fold of Islam if somebody opts a kind of idea that some other ideology is superior to Islam in any capacity. It could be political or any social or moral, right? Because all of these elements we have already discussed, that there is a moral element. They bring a moral element, a new moral element to their own morality. For example, utility is technically a utilitarianism is a moral tool which helps aid their political activity, right? So we can see that That's how it came about. Right? Yeah.
I mean, the ideologies that you guys talk about a lot, utilitarian ethics, deontological ethics, natural rights theories, and things like this. These were actually evolutions and arguments that the West was desperately trying to find a basis for its non-religious, non-revelationary laws. So it first said natural rights. Then David Hume comes and says it's nonsense on stilts, and he says that's actually the phrase he said. And he argued that that's actually Jeremy Bentham. David Hume said there is ought fallacy. Just because you see humans doing one particular thing doesn't mean they ought to be doing that. And he started to criticize those people who made assumptions about what is natural for humans to do, what is the natural for human nature to do. And then they said, okay, we have to find a new basis. Utilitarianism is one, Jeremy Bentham and then John Stuart Mill, or Kant, deontological ethics. And then you saw Thomas Green with social idealism, inspired by Hegel. And so on and so forth. Everyone, they're desperately grasping, because once they said, well, we've adopted this materialistic ideology of these laws, and they kept, but the foundation was shaky, and they kept refuting and seeing the problems with it, and they kept trying to replace the new foundation. And let's put a new foundation on it. And it's like, we dig under this, we look under this new building you have there, mashallah, and we discover there's just sand, like no foundations, no concrete, just sand. Like, oh, quickly, we have to find a new thing, and we just put paper, and then it rots. Oh no, let's put something else, jelly, whatever, right? That is what's going on. Right? That's what was going on when you see all these debates on what is the basis for morality in the West. Once they created it, they discovered it was empty, and they kept desperately trying to stuff new things to form the basis. And obviously, as Muslims, we don't see this in the Muslim world. The West says we have a confident basis, and we have an objective basis for rights and so on and so forth, and that's not the case. And I think I'll and my last thing I'll say on this is I want to give an analogy. I'll give an analogy based on a recent experience, which is maybe uncooked chicken. So. The West, the Western colonialists, when they came, they weren't atheists, right? They were mostly Christians. They didn't actually intend Muslims to be atheists, right? I mean, it was helpful, but they didn't intend. They even said that Muslims can actually be conservative. They can keep some aspects of Islam to maintain social stability, because this is your traditions, and traditions help stability. They didn't think you must get rid of it completely, as long as you adopt secularism, right, as the main basis of the state. So it's like someone who is eating a chicken burger with salmonella because it hasn't been cooked properly, and they're slowly getting sick from it. But it tastes really good burger. Try it. Like, this is the best burger for you. They didn't. You eat it and you start to get sick, right? They didn't intend you to get sick. They didn't intend themselves to get sick. And by sickness, I mean here in this metaphor or the allegory, atheism, right? But the burger's causing it. But they just eat the burger because they think it's the best burger. It tastes nice, and they want you to eat it because it's the best burger. And in this case, the analogy, they're forcing it down your mouth, but without choice. But that's what the colonialists did when they came to the Muslim world. They were Christians by and large. They even called themselves, this was actually before they called themselves the West, they called themselves the Christian nations. And they just thought that they were on a civilizing mission. And that this new product they invented, secularism and liberalism, is the next stage of evolution and progress for mankind, and they were simply spreading it because that was the
goodness with the other people as well, the rest of the world.
That was their view. They didn't realize themselves that, wait a second, this ideology you're spreading is eroding your own morals and culture in your own countries, and will lead to that in the Muslim world too.
Yes. So in summary, we've got progressivism, the idea, right? The idea of progress, and the idea of secularism. These are the core foundations, we can say, that led the Western movement and also is impacting others as well. So Jazakallah khair, Brother Abdullah, for this, and also Brother Mugheerah, Luqman, thank you for this.
And I want to add just a quick point, because I want to make sure that no one misunderstands. The idea that we can improve society and improve our material conditions is not wrong inherently of itself. As Muslims, we can believe this, not because progress is great for its own sake, no, but improving the material conditions of society, creating ease, is done fi sabilillah, right? Because why did we invent things in the first place? It was only to worship Allah, to seek His pleasure. It wasn't we want progress for its own sake. No, it's progress, i.e., simply improving our situation, improves our state with Allah, subhanahu wa ta'ala, our maqam with Him. We're improving. I leave a sadaqah jariyah behind if I invent something and people benefit from it. That's why Muslims improved. It wasn't for its own sake. But the West, the idea that progress, the atheists adopted and said progress for its own sake. And that is, to answer your early question, that is the distinct ideology that is distinct to them. But progress itself is not inherently bad, and we should do it, but we only do it only because we are seeking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's pleasure.
So the primary differences in the objectives of the maqsid behind that, what is the primary purpose behind that?
So, Jazakallah khair, Barakallah feek. Thank you for joining us. Inshallah, we'll have another discussion on the idea of atheism itself and idea of scientism and how it correlates and what we can argue for it. What are the key arguments and how we can refute them, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.